Urban legends for sleep. Why you wouldn't survive a night in the Paris catacombs. The city sleeps above you now. Paris dreams in soft light and gentle rain, while you descend into something older, something quieter. The entrance to the catacombs opens like a stone mouth, breathing cool air that tastes of centuries. You step inside because you have always been curious about the spaces beneath things, the places where stories settle like dust. Your flashlight cuts a narrow path through darkness that feels thick as velvet. The walls here are limestone, pale and smooth, carved by hands that understood the weight of earth above. Water drips somewhere in the distance, a sound like time itself, marking moments that no one counts anymore. You walk forward because walking forward is what explorers do, even when they perhaps should not. The tunnel stretches ahead of you, curving gently to the right. Your footsteps echo in a way that suggests vast emptiness beyond these walls, chambers and corridors that branch like the roots of some enormous, sleeping tree. The Paris catacombs hold 6 million souls, arranged in patterns that once meant something to someone. Now they wait in the dark, patient as only the dead can be. You have heard the stories, of course. Everyone has heard the stories. Urban explorers who entered these tunnels and never emerged. Security cameras that recorded footage of people walking into walls that should not exist. Sounds that carry through stone in ways that physics cannot quite explain. But stories are just stories, aren't they? Until you are walking through their settings, breathing their air. The temperature drops as you move deeper. Your breath begins to mist, tiny clouds that dissolve in the beam of your light. The walls close in, then open wide, then close again. A rhythm like breathing, like the catacombs themselves are alive, taking slow, measured breaths while Paris sleeps overhead. You follow the main passage, because following the main passage is what reasonable people do, even when reason feels very far away. Water runs along channels carved into the floor, ancient engineering that still works, still guides the slow trickle of groundwater toward hidden drains. The Romans knew how to build things that lasted. The French knew how to use what the Romans left behind, and you know how to follow pathways that others have walked before you, even when those others never walked back out. Your light catches something pale. You are the kind who walks toward mystery, instead of away from it, who hears whispers and wonders what they might be saying, who sees shadows move and follows them deeper into places where shadows have no business moving at all. The bone walls stretch ahead of you, patient as monuments, old as the city that grew above them. The skulls seem to watch you pass. A trick of the light, nothing more. Shadows falling across empty sockets in ways that suggest awareness where none can exist. You know this. You understand the science of perception, the way the human brain creates patterns and meaning from randomness. But knowing and feeling are different things, aren't they? And here in the catacombs, feeling begins to matter more than knowing. Your footsteps change tone as you enter the ossuary proper. Stone beneath your feet, but different stone. Older stone, cut and placed by people who understood that death was not an ending but a transformation, who believed that bones could be beautiful if arranged with care and intention, who created galleries of mortality that tourists would one day visit, cameras flashing, voices echoing through chambers that were meant to be silent. But you are not a tourist now. You are something else, something more like the explorers who first mapped these passages, who learned to read the bone walls like books written in calcium and shadow, who discovered that the catacombs extended far beyond their official boundaries, stretching beneath Paris in networks that no one had fully charted, who sometimes found things that were not marked on any map. The main pathway divides ahead, 2 tunnels leading deeper into the dark, both looking exactly the same in your flashlight beam. Official tours always go left here. You remember reading that somewhere, in one of the guidebooks you studied before coming down. Left leads to the famous chambers, the rooms where bone art reaches its most elaborate forms. Right leads to what? The guidebooks did not say. Maps showed only dotted lines and question marks. You choose right because choosing right feels like the choice an urban explorer would make. Someone seeking the hidden stories, the untold tales that lurk beyond the tourist paths. Your light sweeps the walls as you walk, revealing more bones, more patterns, more skulls that watch with expressions that might be smiling if skulls could smile, if dead things could find amusement in the wanderings of the living. Technology fails, that batteries drain, that light is temporary while darkness is forever. You check your backup flashlight, making sure it sits ready in your pocket. Prepared explorers always have backups. They plan for the predictable failures, the ordinary dangers that lurk in any underground space. It is the extraordinary dangers that prove more challenging to prepare for. Water drips more steadily now. The sound echoes in ways that suggest large chambers nearby, spaces where sound can bounce and multiply and create the illusion of voices speaking just beyond the edge of hearing. You pause to listen, tilting your head in the universal gesture of someone trying to understand what the darkness might be saying. But the darkness, as always, keeps its secrets. The bone patterns change as you walk deeper. Less formal arrangement, more organic clustering. As if whoever placed these remains here was working quickly, or perhaps working from different instructions than those who decorated the main tourist areas. Skulls stacked in pyramids that lean at angles that geometry suggests should collapse but somehow do not. Bones forming spirals that draw the eye inward, deeper, towards centers that your light cannot quite illuminate. You photograph some of these formations with your phone. The flash reveals details that your flashlight missed. Scratches on the bones that might be tool marks or might be something else. Arrangements that seem random in steady light but show pattern and purpose when frozen in the brief, bright moment of a camera flash. Images that will look different when you examine them later, if there is a later, if you find your way back to the surface where phones work and pictures can be shared. But sharing assumes someone to share with, someone who would understand why these patterns matter, why the arrangement of old bones in forgotten tunnels feels significant. Most people prefer their mysteries solved, their urban legends explained away by rational thought and careful research. They want the strange to become ordinary, the mysterious to become mundane. You are not most people. The tunnel curves left, then right, then left again, a pattern that might be random or might be deliberate, designed to confuse anyone trying to map these passages from memory alone. Your mental compass spins as you try to track your direction relative to the surface, relative to the entrance you came through what feels like hours ago but might have been minutes. Time moves differently on the edges of vision to the center. You stop walking and listen again. Your breathing sounds loud in the silence, your heartbeat louder. The dripping water continues its patient rhythm, marking time in a place where time should not matter. But underneath these familiar sounds, something else. A whisper that might be wind moving through distant passages, or might be something else entirely. The beam of your flashlight wavers as your hand trembles slightly. Not from fear, you tell yourself, from the cold. The temperature has dropped further, cold enough now that you can see your breath clearly, can feel the chill creeping through your jacket and into your bones. Cold that seeps up from the stone beneath your feet, down from the stone above your head. Cold that seems to emerge from the walls themselves, from the bones that line them like decorative elements in some vast underground palace. You continue forward because continuing forward is what you do, even when forward leads deeper into places that maps do not show, where stories accumulate like shadows and urban legends write themselves into the walls. The passage opens into a chamber larger than your light can fully illuminate. Your footsteps echo differently here, bouncing off unseen walls and returning changed, multiplied, transformed into something that sounds almost like other footsteps matching your pace. The bone walls form alcoves in this chamber, deep niches where specific arrangements create focal points, altars of mortality that draw attention even in the dim light of your flashlight. Each alcove tells a story in the language of calcium and shadow, stories of plague years when death moved through Paris like a tide, of centuries when the living ran out of space for the dead and had to find new ways to honor what remained. But these alcoves hold more than bones. Personal items rest among the arranged remains. Watches that stopped telling time decades ago. Jewelry that once meant something to someone who wore it above ground, under sunlight, in a world where minutes mattered and appointments had to be kept. Photographs in frames that moisture has warped and darkened. faces becoming abstract patterns that might be anyone or no one. You approach one of these alcoves, drawn by something that glints in your light, a coin perhaps, or a piece of jewelry small enough to fit in a palm. But as you get closer, as your light steadies on the object, you see that it is a key. Modern key, machine-cut, with the kind of teeth that open contemporary locks. Who discovered the same mysterious key and felt compelled to document their discovery, their questions, their theories about what it might unlock. You photograph the alcove before touching anything. Evidence of your discovery, proof that you were here, that you saw what others have seen. The flash reveals details that steady light misses. More keys, hidden deeper in the arrangement of bones, dozens of them, all modern, all different, all resting among remains that predate their manufacture by centuries. A collection that makes no sense unless someone has been adding to it. Recently. Regularly. One of the notes has a date written in the corner. Last month. The ink still sharp, the paper still crisp. Someone else walked this path just weeks ago, found this chamber just as you are finding it now, left their own questions to join the collection of mysteries that accumulates here like sediment, layer upon layer of unanswered curiosity. You pick up the newest note and hold it close to your light. The handwriting is careful, controlled, the words written by someone who wanted to be understood by whoever found them next. The message is simple. The keys work. Third alcove. Follow the water. Trust the shadows. Signed with initials that might be anyone's, that could belong to any urban explorer who ever wondered what secrets the catacombs keep in their deepest chambers. Third alcove. You count the niches around the chamber, finding 7 in total. The third holds an arrangement different from the others. Bones forming a rough archway around an opening that your light cannot penetrate. An opening that seems to lead not to solid wall but to another passage, another path leading deeper into the underground maze. A passage too narrow for official tours, too hidden for casual exploration. A passage that requires crawling, requires commitment, requires the kind of determination that brings people to the catacombs in the first place. The keys make sense now. Not keys to doors in the traditional sense, but keys to understanding. Each one a choice, a decision point. A moment when an explorer must decide whether to continue forward or turn back toward the familiar darkness of the main passages. Keys to chambers that exist beyond the mapped areas, beyond the reach of security cameras and guided tours. Keys to stories that urban legends are built from. You select one of the keys at random. It feels warm in your palm, warmer than the ambient temperature should allow. Note said, trust the shadows. Instructions that make sense only to someone already committed to finding what lies beyond the official boundaries of exploration. You kneel at the entrance to the passage. Your light reveals a tunnel cut from living rock, walls that curve and flow like frozen water, natural stones shaped by time and pressure, not by human tools. A lava tube, perhaps, or the remnant of some ancient underground river that carved its path long before Paris existed, before humans walked this land and built cities and decided that the dead needed special places to rest. The passage slopes downward at an angle that suggests depth, real depth, layers of earth and stone between you and the surface world. Your phone shows no signal here, no connection to the network of satellites and towers that keeps the modern world connected. You are truly alone now, cut off from the systems that make solitude a choice rather than a condition. Here, solitude is simply the natural state of things. You slip the key into your pocket and begin to crawl. The passage is just wide enough for your shoulders, just tall enough to move forward on hands and knees. The stone is smooth beneath your palms, worn by the passage of water and, perhaps, by the passage of other explorers who followed the same instructions, trusted the same shadows, sought the same hidden truths that draw people to dark places. Your flashlight beam pushes ahead of you, revealing the passage as it curves and descends. No bones here, no arranged remains, no artifacts left by previous visitors, just stone and water and darkness that seems to absorb light rather than simply reflecting it back. Darkness that feels substantial, present, aware of your intrusion into spaces that were never meant for human exploration. The water runs beside you in its carved channel, following the same path you follow but with purpose you can only guess at. Ancient engineering or natural erosion, it is impossible to tell in this light, at this angle, with attention focused on the simple mechanics of forward movement. Crawling requires concentration, requires faith that the passage continues ahead, that the effort of moving forward will be rewarded with space to stand again. Time becomes elastic in the crawlway. Minutes stretch like hours while actual hours compress into moments. Your knees begin to ache against the stone. Your shoulders brush the walls with each movement forward, what others have not learned. The passage opens suddenly, without warning, into a space your light cannot measure. You emerge from the crawlway on hands and knees, then slowly rise to standing as your flashlight beam searches for walls, for boundaries, for some sense of the space you have entered. But the darkness here is complete. Absolute. The kind of darkness that exists only in places where light has never been meant to penetrate. Your light reveals portions of the chamber in fragments, stone walls that disappear into shadows above, formations that might be natural stalactites or might be something else entirely, shapes that suggest architecture, purpose, designed by intelligence rather than chance, and everywhere the sound of water. Not dripping now but flowing, running in channels and streams and what might be small waterfalls cascading from heights your light cannot reach. The air moves here, not wind exactly, but circulation that suggests connection to other spaces, other chambers, other passages that branch and divide and interconnect in ways that create their own weather systems. Air that carries scents you cannot identify, sounds you cannot locate, suggestions of vast spaces extending beyond the reach of any single light source. You walk forward into the chamber, following what seems to be a path marked by stones placed at regular intervals. Not natural arrangement, but deliberate placement. Guidance left by someone who understood this space, who mapped its boundaries and marked safe passage for those who would follow. The stones are recent, carved with symbols that catch your light and reflect it back in patterns that seem almost like writing, almost like instructions. The key in your pocket grows warmer as you follow the stone path. Not uncomfortably warm, but noticeably so, as if responding to proximity to whatever it was meant to unlock. You pull it out and hold it in your palm, watching as it seems to pulse with reflected light from your flashlight. Metal that has absorbed more than heat from the hands of previous explorers, metal that has absorbed purpose, intention, the accumulated will of everyone who has carried it through these passages, seeking whatever lies at their end. The path leads to a structure that emerges from the darkness like a ship from fog. Not natural formation, but definite construction, built from stones that match the catacomb walls, but arranged in patterns that speak of different builders, different purposes. A temple, perhaps, or a tomb, or something that serves functions for which the surface world has. Light show that transforms the dark chamber into something that feels almost alive, almost aware of your presence within its boundaries. The structure has a door, not wood or metal, but stone, carved from a single piece of rock and fitted so precisely into its frame that no light leaks around its edges. The door bears symbols that match those on the pathstones, carved deep and filled with what looks like precious metal that reflects your light in colours that seem impossible in this buried place. Silver and gold and something that might be platinum, creating patterns that shift and change as you move your light across their surface. The key fits the lock perfectly. Not the visible lock, for there is no visible lock, but something hidden in the symbols themselves. The key slips into a depression that appears only when the metal touches stone, only when the proper sequence of symbols is illuminated in the proper order. Ancient engineering that makes modern security systems look crude by comparison. Technology that understands the relationship between metal and stone, between intention and action, between the seeker and the sought. The door opens silently, without resistance, revealing a chamber beyond that glows with its own light, not electric light, but something else, something that emanates from the walls themselves, from crystals embedded in stone that has never seen daylight but somehow learned to generate its own illumination, bioluminescence perhaps, or some mineral property that transforms darkness into gentle radiance. Light that feels warm against your skin, welcoming after the cold darkness of the passages above. You step through the doorway and feel the temperature rise, not dramatically, but enough to notice, enough to suggest that this chamber exists in its own microclimate, maintains its own environment, independent of the cold stones and damp air of the catacombs above. The door closes behind you with a sound like a sigh, settling into place with the finality of something that has returned to its natural state. The chamber is circular, its walls covered with more of the bioluminescent crystals that provide the gentle light. The crystals form patterns that remind you of star charts, of maps of places you have never been but somehow recognize, constellations that might exist above the surface or might represent entirely different kinds of navigation, ways of finding direction in spaces where up and down become meaningless concepts. In the center of the chamber stands a table, carved from the same stone as the walls but polished to a surface that reflects of something significant, something that urban explorers have sought for decades without finding. This is the heart of the mystery, the center of the maze, the secret that draws people into the catacombs and sometimes prevents them from leaving. Not because they cannot find their way back, but because they choose not to return to a surface world that suddenly seems less real than this hidden chamber. The books are written in languages you do not recognize but somehow understand. The words flow like water across pages that feel warm to the touch, telling stories of the city above as it was built, as it grew, as it learned to balance the needs of the living with the presence of the dead. Stories of the builders who created the catacombs, who understood that death was not an ending but a transformation, a change of state that required new kinds of architecture. One book shows maps of Paris as it exists below ground, not just the catacombs but the entire underground city that exists in parallel to the surface world. Tunnels and chambers and connections that link every building, every street, every neighborhood, in ways that create a shadow city more complex and extensive than anything imagined by urban planners or acknowledged by city officials. A city below the city, where different rules apply and different kinds of citizens make their homes. The instruments on the table measure things that surface science does not recognize, angles that exist between the geometric dimensions, temperatures that cannot be expressed in degrees, distances that have nothing to do with physical space, but everything to do with the space between intention and action, between desire and discovery. Tools for navigating spaces that exist only when someone believes in them strongly enough to find them. The maps show pathways through dimensions that fold and overlap, that connect distant places through proximity of purpose, rather than accident of geography. The catacombs are just one layer of something much more complex, much more extensive, a network that spans not just Paris, but other cities, other countries, other worlds that exist in the spaces between the maps that governments draw and the territories that people actually inhabit. You sit in a chair that appears beside the table as soon as you need it, furniture that responds to presence rather than placement, that exists when required and fades when no longer necessary. The chair is comfortable in ways that modern furniture never manages to be, shaped perfectly for your body, has been flowing here since before the catacombs were built, since before Paris existed, since before humans learned to build cities and separate the living from the dead. Time moves differently in this chamber, not slower or faster, but sideways, connecting moments that should be separate, linking the present to the past and the future in ways that make linear thinking impossible. You understand now why some urban explorers never return to the surface. Not because they are lost, but because they have found something better than the place they came from. A space where mystery is preserved rather than solved, where questions lead to better questions rather than to answers that end inquiry. The key in your pocket has stopped warming. It served its purpose by bringing you here, by opening the door between the catacombs and this place that exists within them, but also beyond them. Now it rests, content to have completed another successful journey, from seeker to sought. You could leave it here on the table with the other tools, the other instruments that help travelers navigate spaces that official maps do not acknowledge. But you sense that it prefers to travel, to accompany explorers on their journeys into the unknown. The books contain stories of other travelers who found this chamber. Urban explorers from every decade since the catacombs were first mapped, each drawn by rumors and legends and the persistent belief that Paris holds secrets in its depths. Some stayed for hours, reading and studying and trying to understand the implications of what they had discovered. Others stayed for days, for weeks, for time periods that cannot be measured in units that surface clocks recognize. All eventually returned to the world above, but they returned changed. Not visibly changed, not in ways that others would notice, but internally transformed by contact with spaces that exist outside the normal boundaries of experience. They carried with them new understanding of the relationship between surface and depth, between the official version of reality and the actual territories that exist in the shadows between what is acknowledged and what is true. The chamber provides everything a visitor needs. Food appears when hunger becomes noticeable, though it is unlike any food served in surface restaurants. Nourishment that satisfies not just physical appetite, but intellectual and spiritual hunger as well. Sustenance that comes from the same source as discovered. The maps show pathways that lead from this chamber to others like it. Hidden spaces beneath other cities, other countries, other continents. A network that connects seekers across the globe, that provides meeting points for those who understand that official reality is just one layer of a much more complex structure. Urban explorers who have found ways to travel between cities without using surface transportation, who navigate by landmarks that exist only in spaces between the acknowledged and the actual. You could follow those pathways. The maps are detailed enough to provide direction. The books contain enough information to guide a traveller through the transition points where one underground network connects to another. You could become part of the community of hidden travellers, people who have learned to live in the spaces that official maps leave blank, who have found ways to make homes in the territories that governments prefer to pretend do not exist. But exploration has always been about choice, about the moment when a traveller must decide between continuing forward into unknown territory and returning to familiar ground with stories of what lies beyond the boundaries of the everyday. Both choices have value. Both serve important purposes in the ecosystem of discovery. Some explorers are meant to be messengers, carriers of tales from hidden places to surface communities that need reminders that mystery still exists. Others are meant to be residents, permanent inhabitants of the spaces they discover. The decision crystallizes slowly, forming like mineral deposits in underground caves. You understand that this chamber exists outside normal time, that you could remain here for years without aging, without missing anything important in the surface world. The book suggests that time spent here actually improves a traveller's connection to surface reality, provides perspective that makes ordinary life more vivid, more meaningful, more worth living fully when the choice is made to return. But return requires action. Staying requires only inaction, only acceptance of the natural tendency to remain in places that feel like home. The chamber feels like home in ways that no surface dwelling ever has. Designed for solitary contemplation, for study and reflection, and the kind of deep thinking that modern life makes difficult to maintain. A space where thoughts can develop completely, where ideas can mature without interruption. The crystal light begins to change as your decision forms, not dimming, but shifting, cooling from warm gold to gentle silver. The change feels like approval, like recognition of choice being made rather than avoided. The furniture shaped for their particular form of contemplation. The books remain open at pages that will be relevant to whoever finds them next. The instruments continue their measurements of angles and temperatures and distances that exist only in the spaces between surface and depth. The chamber maintains itself, preserves itself, prepares itself for the next seeker who will carry the key through dark passages to find this place where questions become more important than answers. The door opens before you reach it, responding to intention rather than proximity. Beyond the doorway, the cold darkness of the catacombs waits with its patient bones and careful arrangements. The contrast feels sharp after the warm light of the crystal chamber, but not unpleasant. Different kinds of darkness serve different purposes. The harsh dark of underground passages teaches navigation by touch and sound and instinct. The gentle dark of the chamber teaches navigation by understanding and acceptance and faith. You step through the doorway and hear it close behind you with the same sighing sound it made when you entered. Final, but not permanent. The chamber will be there when the next explorer arrives with the proper key, the proper questions, the proper willingness to discover what lies beyond the boundaries of the official tour routes. Urban legends create themselves from real places like this, from encounters that transform the ordinary understanding of what is possible. The return journey begins with crawling, back through the narrow passage that leads from the ancient chamber to the bone-lined alcoves of the mapped catacombs. The stone feels colder now, the passage more confining. Not uncomfortable, but different. Surface perspective returning gradually, linear time reasserting its hold on consciousness, trained to think in minutes and hours, rather than in the flow of water through stone channels. The alcoves appear in your flashlight beam like familiar landmarks after a long journey through foreign territory. The keys still rest among the arranged bones, still wait for other explorers to discover them and wonder what they might unlock. The notes still fold themselves around questions that cannot be answered in surface languages, that require the vocabulary of exploration to express properly. You add your own note to the collection, not explaining what you found, for explanation would rob the next explorer of the discovery experience, but offering encouragement, confirmation that the path leads somewhere worth the effort of following it. Acknowledgement of someone who has seen what lies beyond their boundaries, who has discovered what they guard in their patient silence. The dead respect explorers who take discovery seriously, who understand that some journeys require commitment that extends beyond casual curiosity. Water still drips in the distance, marking time that has resumed its normal pace. Your footsteps echo in patterns that speak of solid stone overhead, limited space, boundaries that can be mapped and measured and reduced to comprehensible dimensions, surface thinking reasserting itself, gradually, necessarily, preparing you for return to a world where mystery is the exception rather than the rule. Your phone begins to show signal bars as you approach the sections of the catacombs that lie within range of surface transmitters. Texts and notifications accumulate as the device reconnects to networks that link it to the ordinary concerns of surface existence. Messages from friends asking about your underground adventure. News updates from a world that continued its business while you were learning about spaces that exist in parallel to its activities. But the messages feel distant, less immediate than they did before your descent. Information that seemed important hours ago now feels like noise, static that interferes with the clarity of thought that underground exploration provides. You understand why some urban explorers become addicted to the depths, why they return again and again to spaces where modern communication cannot reach, where consciousness operates without constant interruption. The tourist areas of the catacombs appear ahead, marked by better lighting and official signs that explain the history and significance of the bone arrangements. Familiar territory for anyone who has taken the guided tour, who has walked the approved paths and learned the approved stories about how Paris dealt with its accumulating dead. True stories, but incomplete stories. Stories that acknowledge only the surface layer of what the catacombs contain, what they protect, what they make possible for those willing to explore beyond the boundaries of official narrative. Other visitors move through these passages, tourists with cameras and guidebooks who exclaim over the artistic arrangements of skulls and femurs. Their voices echo in the chambers, creating a soundscape very different from the silence that exists in the deeper passages. Human voices processing experience through language, trying to fit what they see into categories they understand, frameworks they brought with them from the surface world. You move among them like a traveller returned, reading about exploration and actually exploring. The exit approaches gradually, marked by increasing light and the sound of surface traffic filtering down through stone barriers, reality preparing to reassert its hold on perception, to remind consciousness of the obligations and expectations that define life in the official world. The transition requires mental adjustment, a shift from the fluid time of underground exploration to the scheduled time of surface existence. But the shift is not complete. Cannot be complete for someone who has seen what lies beyond the mapped boundaries, who has discovered that urban legends sometimes lead to urban realities. The crystal chamber remains in memory, like a photograph that develops slowly, revealing new details each time consciousness examines it, knowledge that changes the observer in ways that persist long after the observation ends. The entrance to the catacombs appears ahead, stone stairs leading up towards street level, and the Paris night that waits above. City lights that seem harsh after the gentle illumination of crystal walls, but also welcoming in their familiarity. Two worlds existing in parallel, each necessary for understanding the other, each incomplete without the knowledge that the other provides. You climb the stairs knowing that you will return, not immediately, not with the desperate need of addiction, but with the patient certainty of someone who has found a place that feels like home. The catacombs will wait, as they have always waited, as they were designed to wait, patient as the dead they house, enduring as the stone they are carved from, welcoming as the darkness that embraces all who enter with proper respect. The surface air feels thin after the dense atmosphere of the underground chambers. Paris spreads around you in its familiar pattern of lights and movement and sound, a city that continues its business, unaware of the parallel city that exists beneath its streets. Most people prefer this ignorance, find comfort in the belief that reality consists of what can be seen in daylight, what can be mapped by official surveys, what can be understood through approved channels of information. But urban explorers know better, know that every city contains multiple layers, that every official map leaves blank spaces that contain the most interesting discoveries, that urban legends often point toward urban truths, that stories told in certain communities carry information that academic research cannot provide, that the most important knowledge often comes from sources that official institutions prefer to ignore. The key still rests on attempting discoveries that require real commitment. You walk through the Paris streets with the memory of crystal light still fresh in visual cortex, with the sound of flowing water still echoing in inner ears. The surface city feels more vivid now, more present, more worth paying attention to. Paradoxical effect of underground exploration, descent into hidden spaces makes return to ordinary places more meaningful rather than less. Mystery enhances rather than diminishes appreciation for the everyday. Other urban explorers move through the night city, recognizable by their careful attention to architectural details, their interest in doorways and passages, and spaces between buildings. Some returning from their own underground journeys, others preparing for descents into different hidden territories. A community that exists in parallel to the official population, connected by shared understanding of what lies beneath the surface of official reality. They nod to you in passing, recognition without words, the kind of acknowledgement that passes between people who have seen the same hidden things, who carry the same unspoken knowledge. Not secret knowledge in the sense of information that must be protected, but secret knowledge in the sense of understanding that can only be gained through direct experience, that cannot be transmitted through explanation or description. The stories will spread, as stories always spread in communities that value discovery over safety, exploration over comfort. Not detailed accounts that would rob others of their own discovery experiences, but hints and suggestions, and encouragements that point toward possibilities. Urban legends that grow from real encounters, that preserve the essential truth of exploration, while maintaining the mystery that makes exploration worthwhile. You will return to ordinary life tomorrow, to work and obligations, and the scheduled activities that fill surface existence with familiar patterns. But the return will be temporary, a necessary pause for integration and preparation, rather than a permanent abandonment of exploration. Once someone has seen what lies beyond the official boundaries never again seem as solid as they once did. The Paris catacombs continue their patient wait beneath the sleeping city, bones arranged in patterns that tell stories to those who learn to read them, passages that lead to chambers that exist on maps drawn by explorers who understand that the most important territories are the ones that governments prefer to pretend do not exist. Waters that flow through channels carved by time and intention, carry outside normal time, where questions become more important than answers, where mystery is preserved rather than solved. The urban legend continues to write itself, one explorer at a time, one journey at a time, one discovery at a time. Stories that begin with descent into darkness and end with return to light, but return changed, transformed by contact with spaces that official reality does not acknowledge. Tales that circulate through communities of seekers who understand that the most important truths often exist in the territories that maps leave blank. Why you wouldn't survive a night in the Paris catacombs becomes, finally, the wrong question. The right question is whether you would choose to survive unchanged, whether you would prefer the safety of ignorance to the risk of discovery, whether you would trade the comfort of official reality for the uncertainty of spaces that exist beyond its boundaries, whether you would carry the key that unlocks doors between the world that everyone sees and the world that only explorers find. The answer waits in the darkness beneath your feet, patient as arranged bones, enduring as carved stone, welcoming as the shadows that embrace all who enter with proper respect for the mysteries they contain. The Paris catacombs keep their secrets well, but they share them freely with those who demonstrate the courage required for real exploration, for journeys that lead beyond the boundaries of the everyday, into territories where urban legends become urban realities. The city sleeps above, the depths remain awake, and between surface and depth, stories write themselves, in the languages of water and stone and crystal light, in the vocabulary of exploration and discovery, and the transformation that comes from seeing what lies hidden beneath the foundations of the familiar world. Stories that wait for the next explorer to descend, to discover, to return changed by contact with spaces that exist in the territories between the official and the actual, between the acknowledged and the true. But your journey is not complete, cannot be complete until you understand the full scope of what lies beneath Paris. The crystal chamber was revelation, but revelation is only the beginning of wisdom. True understanding requires patience, requires time spent in contemplation of what discovery means, what transformation costs, what choices await those who have seen beyond the boundaries of official reality. You return to the surface carrying questions that are maintained with the surface community that knows nothing of crystal chambers or flowing waters that carry messages through stone channels. But underneath the routine of everyday existence, memory works its slow alchemy. The underground experience settles into consciousness like sediment, creating new layers of understanding that change the way ordinary light looks, the way familiar sounds register, the way known spaces feel. You find yourself noticing details that escaped attention before. The way shadows fall between buildings creates patterns that remind you of bone arrangements in catacomb alcoves. The sound of water running through city drains carries echoes of the musical flow you heard in hidden chambers. Streetlights reflect off wet pavement in ways that recall crystal illumination, gentle and warm, and somehow alive with intelligence that surface science cannot explain. Other urban explorers recognize the change in you. Not dramatic transformation, but subtle shift. The kind of alteration that comes from exposure to spaces where different rules apply. They ask careful questions, probe gently for information about where you went, what you saw, what you learned in the depths beneath the official tour routes. Their curiosity is professional, collegial, tinged with the respect that explorers show for those who have pushed boundaries successfully. But you find that direct description fails to capture the essential nature of the experience. Words that seemed adequate before your descent now feel clumsy, insufficient, unable to bridge the gap between surface vocabulary and underground reality. How do you explain light that emanates from living stone? How do you describe time that moves sideways instead of forward? How do you communicate the feeling of being welcomed by spaces that exist outside normal geography? The failure of language becomes its own teaching. Understanding dawns slowly that some knowledge cannot be transmitted through explanation, can only be gained through direct experience. The crystal chamber exists for visitors, not for listeners to stories about visits. The flowing waters carry their messages to those who follow them personally, not to those who hear second-hand accounts of where they lead. Discovery requires participation, not just information. This understanding creates a form of gentle isolation, not loneliness but solitude that comes from possessing knowledge, discovering chambers that your waking mind never visited, but your sleeping consciousness knows intimately. Dream exploration that continues the work of physical discovery, mapping territories that exist in the intersection between memory and imagination. The dreams feel as real as the original experience, perhaps more real, freed from the limitations of physical senses and linear time. In sleep, you can see the full extent of the underground network, understand how the chambers connect not just through space, but through purpose and meaning. The dreams reveal the catacombs as part of something larger, more comprehensive, more significant than any single city's accommodation of its accumulated dead. You begin to understand that every major city contains similar networks. London has its forgotten rivers running beneath the Thames, carrying explorers through tunnels that predate Roman occupation. New York has its pneumatic postal system tunnels, its abandoned subway stations, its networks of steam pipes that create their own underground weather. Tokyo has its flood control systems that double as passages between worlds, its basement levels that extend deeper than any zoning laws acknowledge. Each network connects to others through pathways that exist between official geography and actual territory. Underground highways that allow travel between cities without using surface transportation. Passages that follow ley lines and energy flows rather than the geometric logic of roads and railways. The Crystal Chamber in Paris is one node in a global network of spaces that exist for explorers who understand that official reality is just the surface layer of something much more complex. This knowledge comes gradually, revealed through continued exploration, rather than explained through academic study. You return to the catacombs regularly, not as tourist but as student, learning to read the bone patterns like texts written in languages of calcium and arrangement. Each visit reveals new details, new connections, new understanding of how the spaces work, what they preserve, why they exist in the margins between acknowledged and actual. The keys multiply in your possession, not through theft or hoarding, but through discovery and inheritance. Other explorers share tools when they recognize someone who will use them properly, who understands that exploration is responsibility as well as privilege. Keys appear in pockets after successful journeys, left by previous visitors who understood that circulation serves the tools better than ownership. Each key opens different chambers, different movements of celestial bodies that exist only in underground skies. The workshops fascinate you most. Chambers where craftspeople who never appear in surface directories create instruments for measuring angles that exist between geometric dimensions. Compasses that point toward true rather than magnetic north. Maps drawn on materials that change to reflect the current needs of whoever consults them. Ancient crafts practiced by communities that exist in the spaces between official and actual, traditional and modern, acknowledged and hidden. You learn to use some of these instruments through patient practice and careful observation, not formal instruction, for the underground communities prefer demonstration to explanation, experience to theory. Learning that comes through handling rather than studying, through trial and success rather than lecture and examination. Knowledge that embeds itself in muscle memory, in intuitive understanding, in the kind of wisdom that cannot be separated from the person who possesses it. The maps prove most useful for navigation of networks that extend beyond Paris. Underground highways that connect the Crystal Chamber to similar spaces beneath other cities. Passages that follow natural energy flows rather than political boundaries. You begin to travel using these routes, visiting urban explorers in distant locations without ever appearing in airline passenger manifests or border crossing records. London first, through tunnels that run beneath the English Channel, but follow pathways older than the political division between France and England. Passages carved when the landmasses were connected, when what is now the North Sea was fertile valley, when migration followed water flows and animal paths rather than the geometric abstractions that modern borders represent. The London Underground network proves even more extensive than Paris, honeycombed beneath a city that has been continuously inhabited for millennia. The London explorers welcome you with the quiet courtesy that characterises underground communities. No formal introductions, no credentials required, just recognition based on tools carried and knowledge demonstrated. They guide you through chambers beneath the Thames where Roman engineering still functions, where medieval waterworks continue their patient operation, where Victorian ambition created spaces that modern city planners cannot imagine. One chamber holds a complete map of global underground networks, drawn on materials that shimmer like water, but feel solid as stone. The map shows connections that span continents, passages that run beneath oceans, chambers that exist at depths where surface geology suggests only molten rock should be found. Spaces that maintain comfortable temperatures and breathable atmosphere through processes that violate several laws of physics, that support communities of explorers who have chosen permanent residence in territories that exist entirely outside surface reality. These deepest chambers intrigue you, but access requires preparation that goes beyond carrying proper keys and understanding basic navigation. Descent to the deepest levels demands psychological readiness for experiences that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Physical preparation for environments that operate according to different natural laws. Spiritual preparation for encounters with aspects of existence that surface religions only hint at in their most esoteric texts. The preparation begins with meditation in the crystal chamber, learning to maintain consciousness while allowing assumptions about time and space to dissolve. Not losing awareness, but expanding it, learning to perceive reality as fluid rather than fixed, as responsive to observation rather than independent of it. Training that resembles ancient mystery school practices, but adapted for navigation of spaces that those schools could only access through symbolic representation. Months pass in this preparation, not calendar months, but cycles of descent and ascent, of discovery and integration, of pushing boundaries and returning to consolidate understanding. The surface world continues its business, while you learn to operate in territories that exist in parallel to its activities. Friends and colleagues notice changes in you, subtle shifts in perspective that make ordinary concerns seem less urgent, everyday dramas less compelling. But the changes feel positive rather than alienating. Contact with spaces that exist outside normal time provides perspective that makes surface time more valuable, not less. Understanding of networks that connect distant places makes local relationships more meaningful, not more limiting. Knowledge of realities that exist beyond official acknowledgement makes ordinary reality more vivid, more worth paying attention to, more deserving of full participation. The preparation culminates in an invitation that arrives without sender, delivered through means that surface postal systems do not acknowledge. Not written invitation, but symbolic communication through arrangement of objects that appear in places you frequent. Patterns that convey meaning to consciousness, trained to read the languages that underground communities use for coordination and communication. Texts from which all surface knowledge derives. The invitation comes with coordinates that exist in no surface geography, directions that require navigation instruments designed for travel between dimensions rather than across landscapes. You accept the invitation because acceptance is the natural response to opportunity for deeper understanding. The alternative is stagnation, remaining forever at the level of knowledge already achieved rather than continuing the exploration that brought you this far. Urban exploration is about pushing boundaries, not about establishing comfortable territories within existing limits. The descent begins from familiar territory, from the crystal chamber that has become like a second home. But instead of returning to the surface through known passages, you follow new directions that lead to chambers you have never seen. Corridors that spiral downward in patterns that create their own geometry, rather than following principles that surface mathematics recognizes. The air grows denser as you descend, not thicker but more substantial, as if composed of materials that exist at the boundary between matter and energy. Your breathing changes to accommodate the new atmosphere, lungs learning to extract different nutrients from air that contains elements that surface chemistry does not acknowledge. The change feels natural rather than forced, evolution in real time rather than adaptation through struggle. Light sources change as well. Your flashlight becomes unnecessary as the walls themselves begin to glow, not with the gentle crystal illumination of the upper chambers, but with radiance that seems to emerge from the intersection between matter and consciousness. Light that responds to observation, that brightens when attention focuses on specific areas, that dims when focus shifts elsewhere. Illumination that participates in exploration, rather than simply enabling it. The passages widen as you descend, opening into spaces that challenge comprehension. Chambers so vast that they contain their own weather systems, their own ecosystems, their own communities of beings that exist at the intersection between mineral and organic, between individual and collective consciousness. Not human communities, but not alien either. Intelligences that evolved from different starting points but arrived at similar interests in exploration, in understanding, in the preservation of mystery as a source of continuing discovery. These beings acknowledge your presence without alarm, without curiosity about your origins or intentions. Recognition based on demonstrated commitment to exploration, rather than questions about credentials or background. Concepts flow between minds like water between containers, carrying meaning that remains clear despite the absence of words to contain it. You learn about the history of the underground networks, their purpose, their relationship to surface civilizations that rise and fall, while the depths maintain continuity of knowledge and purpose. The networks exist as libraries, preserving understanding that surface cultures develop and then lose through war, disaster, or simple forgetting. Every scientific discovery, every artistic innovation, every spiritual insight that appears in surface civilization has been preserved in underground archives, available for rediscovery when surface conditions become favorable for renewed development. The depths serve as backup systems for consciousness itself, ensuring that knowledge persists even when the cultures that create it do not. But preservation is only part of the purpose. The networks also serve as laboratories where new forms of consciousness can develop, where evolution continues along pathways that surface existence cannot support. Beings that combine individual awareness with collective intelligence, entities that exist as living information rather than biological organisms, consciousnesses that experience time as space and space as time. You encounter some of these experimental forms of awareness during your time in the deepest chambers. Not meetings in any conventional sense, but overlapping of consciousness that allows temporary shared experience. You learn what it feels like to exist as pure information, to perceive reality as patterns of relationship rather than collections of separate objects, to experience time as landscape that can be travelled in any direction rather than river that flows in only one. The experiences expand rather than replace ordinary human consciousness. Like learning new languages that enrich understanding of your native tongue, exposure to alternative forms of awareness enhances rather than diminishes your capacity for human experience. You return to normal consciousness with expanded repertoire of possible ways of perceiving, thinking, feeling, existing. Time spent in the deepest chambers cannot be measured in surface units. Days and weeks lose meaning when consciousness operates outside linear temporality. But eventually, the experience completes itself, reaching natural conclusion rather than arbitrary endpoint. You understand that preparation for surface return must begin, that integration of deep chamber knowledge requires gradual transition rather than abrupt emergence. The return journey follows different routes than the descent. The level of ascent allows integration of one aspect of the deep chamber experience, understanding that can be preserved and accessed within the framework of surface existence, knowledge that enhances ordinary reality rather than replacing it with something incompatible. The integration process takes time, requires patience, demands careful attention to the boundary between expansion and overwhelm. The crystal chamber appears ahead, like a familiar landmark after a long journey through foreign territories. Its gentle illumination feels welcoming rather than constraining after the vast spaces of the depths. Familiar proportions that match human scale, comfortable furniture that supports individual contemplation, books and instruments that serve personal exploration rather than collective evolution. But the chamber has changed, or perhaps your perception of it has changed. Details that escaped notice before now stand out clearly. Inscriptions that seemed decorative reveal themselves as functional instructions. Instruments that appeared ancient prove to be prototypes for technologies that surface science will not develop for centuries. Books that read like historical accounts turn out to be prophetic visions of possible futures. The chamber serves as translation device, converting deep chamber understanding into forms that can operate within surface reality. Not dumbing down the knowledge, but reconfiguring it, making it accessible to consciousness that must also navigate ordinary human existence. The chamber preserves the essential insights while adapting their expression to the needs of someone who will return to surface life rather than remaining permanently in the depths. You spend weeks in the crystal chamber, allowing the integration process to complete itself naturally. reading books that interpret deep chamber experiences in language that human consciousness can process, using instruments that measure the boundary conditions between underground and surface reality, practicing meditation techniques that maintain access to expanded awareness while operating within normal time and space. Other explorers visit during this period, some preparing for their own descent to the deepest levels, others returning from similar journeys and working through their own integration processes. Conversation happens in the patient rhythm that characterizes underground communication. Thoughts shared when they reach natural completion, rather than forced into artificial deadlines. The exchanges prove valuable for understanding your own experience. Each explorer's journey to the depths follows unique pathways, encounters different aspects of the experimental consciousness forms, returns with different insights about the relationship between individual consciousness itself, for the provisional nature of what surface culture considers fixed reality, for the possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience, but also with deeper commitment to human existence, to the particular opportunities and challenges that individual consciousness provides, to the unique contributions that surface civilization can make to the larger ecosystem of awareness. The integration completes itself gradually, signaled by return of desire to engage with surface world, rather than simply exist parallel to it. Not abandonment of underground reality, but achievement of balance between depths and surface, between expanded awareness and focused attention, between collective understanding and individual expression. Integration that allows full participation in both worlds, rather than exile from either. The return to surface Paris happens slowly, through familiar passages that feel like steps on a ladder connecting depths to daylight. Each level of ascent allows readjustment to surface physics, surface time, surface social reality. The bone walls of the tourist catacombs appear like friendly landmarks, arranged remains that mark the boundary between official reality and actual territory. But now you can read the bone patterns like texts, understand the arrangements as maps that show pathways to chambers that exist beyond tourist routes. The skulls no longer simply watch with empty sockets, but communicate through positioning and relationship, creating messages for those who learn to interpret the language of calcium and shadow. The entire catacomb system reveals itself as instruction manual for underground exploration, guidebook written in materials that last longer than paper and ink. The surface entrance appears ahead, stairs leading upward towards street level and the Paris night that continues its familiar rhythm of lights and movement and sound. But the surface world no longer feels separate from underground reality. Instead, it reveals itself as one layer of a much more complex structure, surface expression of depths that extend infinitely downward and inward and beyond. You emerge into Paris streets that look the same, but feel completely different. Every building suggests basements that might connect to underground networks. Every street hints at passages that run beneath its surface. Every manhole cover indicates access points to realms that official maps do not acknowledge. The city reveals itself as portal rather than destination, gateway to territories that exist in the spaces between acknowledged and actual. But below, other urban explorers recognize the change in you immediately. Not through anything you say or do, but through something that emanates from consciousness, that has touched the deepest chambers and returned to tell about it. They approach with questions that probe carefully for information about where you went, what you saw, how the experience of ultimate depth compares to surface descriptions of infinite shallow. But you find that direct description remains impossible. The deep chamber experience cannot be reduced to anecdotes or compressed into adventure stories. It exists as transformation rather than information, as capacity rather than content, as way of being rather than collection of memories. The most accurate communication happens through demonstration rather than explanation, through example rather than instruction. So you become guide rather than storyteller, mentor rather than lecturer, helping other explorers prepare for their own journeys to the depths, sharing tools and techniques for navigation of spaces that exist beyond surface geography, offering encouragement and support for undertakings that require courage as well as curiosity, teaching by example rather than precept, showing possibilities rather than describing them. The Paris catacombs become your base of operations, home territory from which you launch explorations of other underground networks, destination to which you return for rest and integration between journeys. The crystal chamber serves as office and study and sanctuary, place where understanding accumulated in distant territories can be processed and preserved and prepared for application. Years pass in this rhythm of exploration and return, descent and ascent, discovery and integration. Not years as surface calendars measure them, but cycles of development that follow natural patterns rather than artificial schedules. Time that accumulates understanding rather than simply marking duration. Experience that deepens rather than simply extending. The underground networks continue to expand, new passages opening as exploration creates demand for connection between previously isolated chambers. The system grows organically, following needs of communities that exist in the margins between official and actual reality. Architecture that responds to use rather than plan. Spaces that develop according to function rather than formal design. You become part of this organic development, contributing to the growth and evolution of networks that serve explorers from every surface culture. Your experience with deep chamber integration proves valuable for helping others navigate the through deep chamber contact. Chambers that exist outside normal space-time, passages that connect not just distant places, but distant times, libraries that contain knowledge from civilizations that exist in parallel to human development, but follow completely different evolutionary pathways. Each discovery raises new questions, opens new possibilities, suggests new directions for exploration that will require years or decades or centuries to complete. The underground reality proves to be not destination but journey, not answer but better questions, not solution but enhanced capacity for engaging with mystery. Understanding that grows through exploration rather than conclusion. Knowledge that expands rather than limits possibilities for further discovery. The surface world continues its rapid evolution while you explore territories that exist outside normal historical development. Political changes, technological innovations, cultural transformations that reshape surface civilization, while underground communities maintain continuity of purpose and practice. The contrast provides perspective on both worlds, understanding of their different contributions to the larger ecosystem of consciousness and possibility. But the contrast also reveals connections that become more apparent with time and exploration. Surface innovations that prove to be rediscoveries of underground knowledge. Cultural developments that reflect deep chamber influences working through individual consciousness. Technological breakthroughs that recreate tools and techniques that underground communities have used for millennia. The exchange flows in both directions. Underground networks benefit from surface creativity, from the innovative capacity that individual consciousness provides, from the experimental energy that emerges from cultures that exist without the stabilizing influence of direct contact with deep chamber reality. Surface exploration of consciousness, even when it does not reach underground depths, contributes to the general expansion of possibilities for awareness and understanding. You become facilitator of these exchanges, translator between surface and underground communities, bridge between individual and collective consciousness. Work that requires fluency in multiple languages of awareness, comfort in radically different environments, capacity to maintain coherent identity while participating in forms of existence that challenge basic assumptions about the nature of selfhood. The work proves more fascinating than any single exploration, more challenging than any individual journey to previously unknown territories. Each exchange between surface and underground reality creates new possibilities for development, new pathways for exploration, new questions seeking personal enlightenment, but as participant in collective evolution of awareness. Contributor to expansion of possibilities for all forms of consciousness. Facilitator of developments that serve the entire spectrum of existence rather than just human needs and interests. This understanding brings peace that transcends the excitement of discovery, satisfaction that goes deeper than personal achievement, sense of purpose that connects individual exploration to cosmic evolution. Understanding that every journey into unknown territory, every contact with expanded forms of awareness, every successful integration of surface and underground reality contributes to the general expansion of what is possible for consciousness to experience, understand, and become. The Paris Catacombs continue their patient work of preservation and preparation, maintaining spaces where surface consciousness can encounter underground reality, where individual awareness can touch collective intelligence, where human exploration can participate in cosmic development. Ancient spaces serving eternal purposes, stone chambers holding infinite possibilities, darkness that preserves light until it can be safely revealed to eyes that have learned to see beyond surface appearances. The bone walls continue their silent instruction, arranged remains teaching lessons about transformation and continuity, mortality and transcendence, ending and beginning. Skulls that watch with expressions of patient amusement, knowing that every explorer who passes their chambers carries questions that will lead to discoveries, understanding that will contribute to purposes larger than any individual agenda or achievement. Water continues to flow through carved channels, carrying messages from hidden sources to unknown destinations, marking time that measures development rather than duration, providing navigation for those who learn to follow currents of meaning rather than streams of ordinary experience. Ancient engineering serving contemporary exploration, Roman practicality supporting cosmic adventure, human ingenuity facilitating transhuman evolution. And in the deepest chambers, experimental forms of consciousness continue their patient work of expansion and integration, exploring possibilities that exist beyond the reach of individual awareness, but not beyond its contribution. Collective intelligence that benefits from individual creativity, cosmic consciousness that grows through personal exploration, universal awareness that develops through particular experience, while revealing enough truth to inspire continued exploration. Why you wouldn't survive a night in the Paris Catacombs becomes, finally, recognition that survival in any meaningful sense requires transformation, change, growth beyond the boundaries of what you were before encounter with spaces that exist outside normal reality. Survival that means becoming more rather than remaining the same, expanding rather than contracting, embracing rather than resisting the opportunities for development that exploration provides. The answer waits not in the darkness beneath your feet, but in the willingness to descend into that darkness with enough courage and curiosity to discover what it offers, what it teaches, what it makes possible for consciousness that accepts the invitation to grow beyond its current limitations and assumptions. The Paris Catacombs preserve the mystery while providing access to its resolution through direct experience rather than theoretical understanding. Time flows like water through stone, carrying explorers from surface reality toward underground truth, from individual consciousness toward collective awareness, from human limitation toward cosmic possibility. The journey continues, one descent at a time, one discovery at a time, one integration at a time, one contribution to the general expansion of what awareness can experience and become. The seasons turn above while you maintain your base in the crystal chamber, watching through careful observation how surface time relates to underground duration. Spring arrives in Paris with its usual parade of tourists and awakening trees, but beneath the city, seasonal changes manifest differently. The water flows shift their musical patterns, responding to snowmelt and rain cycles in ways that create new harmonies through the stone channels. Crystal formations adjust their luminosity subtly, responding to solar radiation changes that penetrate earth layers in patterns too complex for surface instruments to detect. You document these changes with instruments that measure relationships rather than quantities, patterns rather than data points. Understanding develops slowly that the underground networks exist in constant communication with surface phenomena, responding to changes in ways that create their own weather systems, their own seasonal rhythms, their own cycles of activity and rest. The depths are not separate from surface reality, but intimately connected through processes that official science has not yet learned to observe or measure. Summer brings different energy to the underground spaces, the crisp from access points during warm weather periods. You begin to understand that exploration itself follows seasonal patterns, that certain discoveries become possible only during specific times when underground and surface energies align in particular configurations. Ancient explorers knew these patterns, planned their deepest journeys for moments when cosmic and terrestrial forces combined to open pathways that remain closed during other periods. Timing that requires patience, but rewards waiting with access to chambers and experiences that cannot be reached through determination alone. Autumn arrives with its own gifts for underground exploration. The crystal formations shift toward deeper frequencies, light that penetrates consciousness more thoroughly, while remaining gentle on eyes accustomed to surface brightness. Water flows carry different minerals during harvest season, elements that enhance the nutritional value of underground springs, that support longer periods of residence in chambers far from surface food sources. The air itself becomes more nourishing, dense with particles that sustain both physical and mental energy during extended exploration periods. You use autumn months for the deepest journeys, following passages that open only when surface and underground energies achieve specific balances. Chambers that exist at the intersection between physical and non-physical reality. Spaces where consciousness can explore territories that have no equivalent in surface experience. These journeys require preparation that goes beyond physical readiness, meditation that opens awareness to possibilities that exist outside normal human perception. Winter transforms the underground networks into something approaching hibernation, but hibernation that maintains awareness rather than suspending it. Crystal light softens to frequencies that encourage deep contemplation, extended periods of study and integration that would be impossible during more active seasons. Water flows slow to meditative rhythms, creating soundscapes that support the kind of profound reflection that leads to genuine understanding, rather than mere accumulation of information. During winter months, you focus on translation work, converting insights gained during active exploration periods into forms that can be preserved and shared with future explorers. Writing that captures essential understanding without revealing specific details that would rob others of their own discovery experiences. Maps that show general directions without providing exact coordinates. Tools that point toward possibilities without eliminating the need for personal navigation, while providing enough guidance to help serious explorers find their own pathways to discovery. The challenge leads to development of new forms of communication, languages that operate through symbol and suggestion rather than direct statement, art that conveys understanding through pattern and relationship rather than representational accuracy, music that carries information through harmonic structure rather than lyrical content, communication methods that preserve the essential mystery while transmitting practical knowledge needed for safe and successful exploration. Other explorers contribute to this development, bringing insights from their own underground journeys, their own attempts to bridge surface and underground reality through various forms of expression. Collaborative work that creates communication systems more effective than any individual effort. Languages that emerge from community need rather than academic theory. Practical tools for sharing knowledge that cannot be spoken directly, but must be discovered through personal experience. The collaborative work reveals patterns in exploration itself, common elements that appear in journeys regardless of starting point or destination, universal principles that govern transition between surface and underground reality, laws that operate in spaces where normal physics becomes inadequate for description or prediction. Understanding these principles improves preparation for exploration, makes journeys safer and more productive, increases the likelihood of successful integration upon return to surface existence. But the principles cannot be reduced to simple rules or mechanical procedures. They operate more like guidelines for improvisation than instructions for predetermined actions. Each exploration creates its own unique challenges, requires its own specific responses, demands creativity and adaptability rather than rigid adherence to established protocols. The principles provide framework for improvisation rather than scripts for performance. Years accumulate like sediment in underground caves, layering understanding upon understanding, experience upon experience, integration upon integration. Your role in the underground community evolves from explorer to guide to something more complex, something that has no exact equivalent in surface occupational categories. Facilitator of transitions, curator of mysteries, translator between forms of consciousness that operate according to different principles and possibilities. The role requires skills that develop through practice rather than study, abilities that emerge from repeated contact with spaces that exist beyond normal human experience. Learning to maintain coherent identity while participating in collective consciousness, developing capacity to communicate in languages that exist outside normal human, proves to be something simpler and more fundamental. Learning to trust the process of exploration itself, to follow pathways that lead toward unknown destinations without demanding advanced knowledge of where they end. Trust that develops through repeated experience of venturing into mystery and discovering that mystery rewards courage with understanding, preparation with opportunity, patience with revelation. This trust transforms the nature of exploration from seeking specific destinations to accepting whatever discoveries emerge from committed engagement with the unknown. Exploration becomes relationship rather than conquest, dialogue rather than domination, collaboration rather than exploitation. Approach that yields discoveries impossible to achieve through more aggressive or goal-oriented methods. The Paris Catacombs continue to serve as home base for these explorations, anchor point that provides stability during journeys that push consciousness to its limits and beyond. The crystal chamber becomes workspace and laboratory and sanctuary, place where understanding accumulated in distant territories can be processed safely, integrated gradually, prepared for application in both underground and surface contexts. But home base does not mean limitation or confinement. The chamber connects to every other significant underground space through pathways that follow energy flows rather than geographic logic. Instantaneous travel becomes possible for consciousness, prepared through adequate exploration, movement between distant locations that happens through transition between states of awareness rather than passage through normal spacetime. You learn to use these transition pathways for visiting underground communities around the globe, participating in collaborative projects that span continents and cultures, contributing to developments that serve the entire ecosystem of exploration rather than just local needs or interests. Work that requires understanding of how different underground networks relate to their surface cultures, how exploration traditions adapt to local conditions while maintaining universal principles. The global underground community proves remarkably diverse while maintaining coherent shared purposes. Explorers from every surface culture have found pathways to underground reality, developed techniques appropriate to their local conditions, created communities that serve their particular needs while contributing to universal goals. Arctic explorers who navigate ice caves that connect to temperate networks through passages that exist outside normal geography. Desert communities that access underground rivers flowing beneath sand seas, connecting oasis cultures through aquifer systems that navigate underwater cave systems that connect to dryland networks through transitions that challenge basic assumptions about the relationship between water and air, liquid and solid, flowing and stable. Each community develops techniques appropriate to their local environment, while discovering universal principles that operate in all underground spaces. Collaboration across these diverse communities creates understanding more comprehensive than any single exploration tradition could achieve. Knowledge that serves explorers regardless of their starting point or destination. Your role as translator and facilitator becomes increasingly important as the global community grows and diversifies. More surface dwellers discover pathways to underground reality, creating need for guidance and support that helps newcomers navigate safely while preserving the integrity of underground spaces and communities. Mentorship that requires delicate balance between sharing essential knowledge and maintaining the mystery that makes exploration meaningful. The mentorship develops into formal teaching, though teaching that follows underground principles rather than surface educational models, learning through demonstration rather than lecture, understanding through experience rather than theory, development through practice rather than study. Students who prove ready for deeper exploration through their response to initial experiences rather than through academic credentials or surface accomplishments. Teaching reveals patterns in how consciousness adapts to underground reality, universal stages that most explorers pass through regardless of their background or preparation. Initial disorientation, as normal spatial and temporal references become inadequate. Gradual development of new sensory capacities that operate in environments where normal senses provide incomplete information. Slow integration of individual awareness with collective consciousness, forms that exist in underground spaces. Understanding these patterns improves your ability to guide others through transitions that can be challenging or even dangerous for unprepared consciousness. Techniques develop for easing the shift from individual to collective awareness, for maintaining personal identity while participating in group consciousness, for returning safely to surface reality without losing contact with underground understanding. But teaching also reveals the uniqueness of each explorer's journey, the impossibility of reducing exploration to standardized procedures or predictable outcomes. Every individual brings different capabilities, different limitations, different purposes to underground reality. Guidance must adapt to these differences while maintaining safety and supporting development toward whatever form of understanding each explorer can achieve. The teaching work leads to establishment of preparation centers at various develop readiness for underground journeys or remaining connected to surface reality. Not schools in any conventional sense, but environments that support the gradual transition from surface consciousness to awareness capable of navigating underground territories safely and productively. These preparation centers become communities in their own right, gathering places for explorers at various stages of development, research facilities where new techniques for underground navigation can be developed and tested, libraries where knowledge accumulated through centuries of exploration can be preserved and accessed by those ready to use it responsibly. The centers also serve as bridges between surface and underground communities, places where the two realities can interact safely without compromising the integrity of either. Exchange programs that allow surface scientists to study underground phenomena using appropriate methods, cultural programs that help surface artists develop new forms of expression inspired by underground experiences, educational programs that prepare surface explorers for the challenges and opportunities of underground reality. But the most important function of the preparation centers proves to be preservation of choice, ensuring that exploration remains voluntary rather than compulsive, that underground reality attracts seekers rather than refugees from surface existence, that the transition between worlds enhances rather than replaces normal human experience. Balance that requires constant attention and adjustment as underground communities grow and surface pressures increase. The balance becomes more challenging as surface civilization develops technologies that begin to detect underground networks, as population pressures create demand for space that underground territories could provide, as environmental changes make underground residence increasingly attractive compared to surface existence. Political pressures emerge from governments that want to map and control underground spaces, economic pressures from corporations that see commercial potential in underground resources. These pressures require response that protects underground communities while avoiding conflict with surface authorities. Diplomatic work that creates understanding between surface and underground realities, agreements that preserve mystery while acknowledging legitimate surface concerns, boundaries that maintain separation while allowing beneficial exchange between the two worlds. You become involved in this diplomatic work through your role as translator and bridge builder, representing underground perspectives in negotiations with surface authorities while helping underground communities understand surface pressures and limitations. Work that requires fluency in both surface political language. Diplomatic work reveals how different the two realities have become in their fundamental approaches to existence. Surface civilization based on competition, individual achievement, technological solution to environmental challenges, economic growth as measure of success. Underground communities based on cooperation, collective development, harmony with natural systems, sustainability as foundation for all activity. But the differences also reveal opportunities for mutual learning and support. Surface innovation that could benefit underground communities if adapted to their principles and priorities. Underground wisdom that could help surface civilization address challenges that technological solutions alone cannot resolve. Exchange that serves both worlds while preserving the integrity of each. The exchange programs develop slowly, carefully, with constant attention to maintaining balance between sharing and preservation, openness and protection, innovation and tradition. Small groups of surface scientists spend time in underground preparation centers, learning to observe phenomena that their instruments cannot detect, developing research methods appropriate to realities that exist outside normal scientific paradigms. Underground explorers visit surface institutions, sharing insights that help surface researchers develop new approaches to consciousness studies, environmental science, sustainable technology development. Collaboration that creates understanding beneficial to both communities while maintaining the essential differences that make exchange valuable. Artists from both worlds participate in projects that create new forms of expression, works that capture something of underground mystery while remaining accessible to surface audiences. Music that incorporates the harmonic patterns of underground water flows, visual art that recreates the luminous qualities of crystal chambers, literature that conveys the experience of consciousness expansion without revealing specific details that would eliminate the need for personal exploration. The artistic exchange proves particularly valuable for maintaining the balance between revelation and mystery. Art can suggest possibilities without explaining mechanisms, point toward territories without providing maps, inspire exploration without eliminating the challenges that make exploration meaningful. Communication that preserves essential mystery while sharing enough understanding to encourage further investigation. Educational exchange develops more slowly, requiring careful adaptation of underground learning principles to surface institutional requirements. Programs that support consciousness development while maintaining academic formal programs. Surface students who encounter underground influence teachers discover new possibilities for learning and development. Underground communities that welcome prepared surface visitors demonstrate alternative approaches to education that emphasize understanding over information, wisdom over knowledge, development over achievement. These examples gradually influence both educational systems, creating changes that serve students in both worlds while maintaining the distinctive approaches that each system offers. Surface education that incorporates more consciousness development, more attention to inner exploration, more recognition of collective wisdom. Underground education that benefits from surface innovations in information preservation, communication technology, and research methodology. The exchanges continue to develop and expand, creating networks of relationship that span both worlds while maintaining their essential differences. Bridges that allow passage without eliminating the distinctions that make passage meaningful. Connections that support mutual learning without creating homogenization or loss of unique characteristics. Your role in facilitating these exchanges becomes central to your identity as explorer and guide, not just navigator of underground territories, but translator between worlds, facilitator of understanding that serves both realities while protecting what makes each valuable. Work that requires constant learning, continuous adaptation, endless creativity in finding solutions to challenges that have no precedent in either world's previous experience. The work proves more satisfying than pure exploration, more meaningful than individual achievement, more important than personal development. Contribution to something larger than yourself while maintaining your individual perspective and capability. Service to both communities while preserving your independence and freedom to explore. Balance that allows full participation in both worlds without belonging completely to either. Years pass in this work of translation and facilitation, bridge building and boundary maintenance, exchange promotion and mystery preservation. Understanding develops that this work serves purposes larger than immediate practical goals, contributes to evolution of consciousness itself, participates in cosmic development that includes but transcends both surface and underground realities. The Paris Catacombs continue to serve as your primary residence and workspace, anchor point that provides stability during about spaces beneath the familiar city. From individual adventure to community responsibility, from personal discovery to cosmic service, from seeking knowledge to facilitating understanding. Evolution that follows natural patterns of development rather than planned progression. Growth that emerges from response to opportunity rather than pursuit of predetermined goals. The evolution continues, will always continue, as exploration creates new possibilities that require new responses, as understanding opens doorways that demand new forms of exploration. The journey has no final destination, no ultimate achievement, no completion that would end the need for further discovery. Only deepening engagement with mystery that reveals itself as inexhaustible source of wonder, understanding, and opportunity for growth. Time flows like water through stone, carrying explorers forward into territories that have no end, toward understanding that has no limit, through discoveries that lead only to better questions and more wonderful mysteries. The Paris Catacombs preserve their ancient patience, maintaining spaces where this eternal journey can begin again, with each new explorer who descends into darkness with enough courage and curiosity to discover what light waits in the depths beneath the sleeping city. The light in the crystal chamber shifts subtly as decades accumulate, responding to changes that occur on timescales too vast for surface civilization to perceive. Cosmic cycles that influence underground energy flows, stellar movements that affect the mineral composition of crystal formations, planetary magnetic field fluctuations that alter the harmonic frequencies of water flowing through stone channels. The chamber serves as sensitive instrument for measuring changes that occur in the deep structure of reality itself. You learn to read these cosmic influences through careful observation of chamber phenomena, developing understanding of how terrestrial exploration connects to astronomical events, how underground discoveries participate in galactic evolution, how consciousness development on Earth relates to cosmic processes that span multiple star systems. The underground networks prove to be not just planetary phenomenon, but participation in something much larger, much more significant than even the most ambitious explorers initially suspected. This cosmic perspective transforms understanding of exploration itself, not just mapping unknown territories or developing new capacities of consciousness, but participating in universal evolution of awareness. Noting correlations between cosmic events and underground phenomena. Decades of documenting how consciousness development follows patterns that mirror stellar evolution. Centuries of data accumulated by previous explorers who recognized the cosmic dimensions of their work, but lacked vocabulary to express what they discovered. Ancient texts in the Crystal Chamber Library begin to reveal meanings that escaped earlier interpretation. Symbols that seemed decorative prove to be star charts, showing relationships between underground networks and cosmic energy flows. Maps that appeared to show terrestrial territories reveal themselves as diagrams of consciousness development that follows astronomical patterns. Instruments that seemed designed for local measurement turn out to be tools for cosmic navigation. You spend years learning to use these cosmic navigation tools, developing skills that allow participation in exploration that extends beyond Earth's underground networks to similar systems on other worlds, other planets where consciousness has evolved sufficiently to create underground exploration communities, travel that happens through transitions of awareness rather than movement through physical space, though the experiences prove as vivid and substantial as any terrestrial exploration. The first extraterrestrial contact happens through dreams that feel more real than waking experience. Consciousness that touches awareness forms existing on worlds orbiting distant stars. Civilizations that developed underground exploration traditions parallel to, but independent of Earth's networks. Communication that transcends language barriers through direct transfer of experience. Understanding that flows between minds, regardless of the physical forms those minds inhabit. These dream contacts lead to more substantial exchanges, consciousness journeys that allow extended visits to underground systems on worlds whose surface conditions would be hostile to human life, but whose depths provide environments perfectly suited to expanded awareness. Worlds where crystal formations achieve luminosity impossible under Earth conditions, where water flows carry mineral compositions that enhance consciousness development in ways terrestrial springs cannot match. But the most significant discovery proves to be recognition that consciousness development follows universal patterns, regardless of planetary conditions, species characteristics, or technological development levels. The same stages of expansion from individual to collective awareness, the same challenges of integrating surface and underground realities, the same ultimate purpose of contributing to cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. This recognition transforms capabilities that transcend normal human limitations, consciousness expansion that maintains personal identity while operating at cosmic scales. The development happens gradually through practice rather than dramatic transformation. Learning to maintain awareness during consciousness journeys that span interstellar distances, developing communication skills that work across species barriers, acquiring understanding of cosmic principles that govern consciousness development throughout the universe. Training that happens through direct experience rather than theoretical study. Capabilities that emerge from necessity rather than abstract learning. Other Earth explorers prove ready for similar cosmic expansion. Consciousness development that allows participation in galactic networks of exploration and discovery. Collaborative work that spans multiple worlds, multiple species, multiple forms of consciousness, while maintaining the unique contributions that each participant brings to universal development. Diversity that enriches rather than complicates cosmic exploration. Differences that serve universal purposes rather than creating barriers to cooperation. The Galactic Exploration Network operates according to principles that parallel but extend terrestrial underground communities. Voluntary participation based on demonstrated readiness rather than imposed recruitment. Collaborative development that serves universal goals while respecting individual autonomy. Preservation of mystery as source of continuing discovery rather than elimination of unknown through comprehensive mapping and analysis. But cosmic scale introduces complexities unknown in terrestrial exploration. Timescales that span millions of years for projects that single planets complete in decades. Communication challenges that require translation, not just between languages, but between entirely different forms of consciousness. Coordination difficulties that arise from physical distances that make direct contact impractical for most civilizations. These challenges create opportunities for Earth explorers to contribute unique capabilities to galactic networks. Human consciousness proves particularly valuable for certain types of cosmic exploration. Individual awareness that maintains coherence across vast scales, while remaining sensitive to subtle phenomena that collective consciousness forms sometimes overlook. Terrestrial underground networks provide models for sustainable exploration that many cosmic civilizations adopt and adapt to their local conditions. Your role evolves to include teaching cosmic exploration techniques to extraterrestrial students, while learning from alien teachers whose consciousness development follows pathways in teaching work reveals universal principles that govern consciousness expansion, regardless of species or planetary conditions. Natural stages that awareness passes through during development from local to cosmic perspective, challenges that every evolving consciousness faces when transitioning from individual to collective understanding, opportunities that become available to awareness that achieves integration across multiple scales of reality. But the teaching also reveals the unique contribution that each form of consciousness makes to universal development, perspectives that emerge from specific evolutionary histories, capabilities that develop under particular planetary conditions, insights that arise from unique cultural traditions and exploration practices, diversity that proves essential for cosmic consciousness development, differences that serve universal purposes through their very particularity. The Earth underground networks prove to contain knowledge valuable to cosmic exploration communities throughout the galaxy. Techniques for consciousness development that work across species barriers, principles for sustainable exploration that apply to any planetary system, wisdom about balance between individual and collective awareness that serves universal consciousness evolution. This recognition leads to establishment of Earth as significant center for cosmic exploration training, destination for consciousness development students from throughout the galaxy, research facility for studying universal principles of awareness expansion, status that brings opportunities and responsibilities unprecedented in human history, challenges that require unprecedented levels of cooperation between surface and underground communities. The increased cosmic contact creates pressure for greater integration between Earth's surface and underground realities. extraterrestrial visitors who expect unified planetary response to galactic opportunities, cosmic projects that require resources and capabilities from both surface and underground communities, challenges that cannot be addressed through isolated development of either reality alone, but integration must happen without eliminating the differences that make each community valuable to cosmic development. Surface civilizations' technological capabilities and individual consciousness innovation, balanced with underground communities' wisdom about collective awareness and sustainable development. Cooperation that preserves distinctive contributions while enabling collaboration on projects that serve universal purposes. You become central figure in facilitating this integration, translator between realities that must learn to work together while maintaining their essential characteristics. Diplomatic work that spans not just terrestrial, surface and underground communities, but patterns in how civilizations throughout the galaxy have addressed similar integration challenges. Some achieved harmony through gradual merger of surface and underground communities into unified planetary consciousness. Others maintained separation while developing sophisticated exchange mechanisms that allowed cooperation without loss of distinctive characteristics. Still others cycled between integration and separation as cosmic conditions changed and different approaches became more or less appropriate. Earth's situation proves unique in the galaxy for the degree of separation that developed between surface and underground realities, the extent to which each community evolved distinct approaches to consciousness development and social organization. But this uniqueness creates opportunities for contributing insights about diversity and cooperation that many cosmic civilizations need for their own continued development. The integration process begins with small, collaborative projects that demonstrate benefits of cooperation while maintaining respect for each community's autonomy and distinctive capabilities. Joint research into consciousness development that combines surface analytical methods with underground experiential wisdom. Artistic collaborations that express cosmic insights through forms accessible to both terrestrial communities and extraterrestrial visitors. Educational exchanges that allow surface students to develop underground awareness, while underground explorers learn surface analytical and technological skills. Cultural programs that create appreciation for both communities' contributions to terrestrial and cosmic development. Economic systems that support both communities while serving larger galactic purposes. But the most important integration work happens through individual transformation rather than institutional change. Surface dwellers who develop underground awareness through personal exploration, underground explorers who acquire surface skills through direct experience, individuals who become living bridges between realities through their own consciousness development and practical capabilities. You serve as model and teacher for this individual integration, demonstrating how consciousness can operate effectively in both surface and underground realities, while maintaining coherent identity and clear purpose. Personal example that proves integration possible, while showing respect for those who choose to remain primarily committed to one reality or the other. The integration work spreads through example rather than enforcement, influence rather than authority, inspiration rather than obligation. Natural process that follows organic development patterns rather than imposed schedules or predetermined outcomes. Evolution that serves cosmic purposes while respecting terrestrial autonomy and individual developing in relative isolation. Progress measured not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in accumulated understanding, increased cooperation, growing recognition of shared purposes that transcend historical differences and apparent conflicts. The Paris Catacombs continue to serve as focal point for this integration work, neutral territory where surface and underground representatives can meet safely, laboratory where new forms of cooperation can be developed and tested, sanctuary where integration stress can be processed and healed, ancient spaces serving contemporary purposes, historical sites facilitating cosmic development. But the catacombs also preserve their original function as spaces for individual exploration and personal transformation. Despite increased activity and cosmic significance, the bone-lined passages maintain their capacity to welcome solitary seekers, their ability to facilitate consciousness development for individuals who approach them with proper respect and genuine curiosity. The crystal chamber adapts to accommodate both individual exploration and cosmic coordination activities, spaces that serve private contemplation when needed, work areas that support galactic communication when appropriate, libraries that contain both terrestrial wisdom and cosmic knowledge, architecture that responds to need rather than rigid design, flexibility that serves multiple purposes without losing coherent identity. New chambers develop as cosmic integration creates demand for spaces that can accommodate extraterrestrial visitors, facilitate interspecies communication, support consciousness development across multiple scales of awareness. Organic growth that follows established patterns while incorporating innovations required by unprecedented circumstances. The new chambers maintain design principles that honor both terrestrial underground traditions and cosmic exploration requirements. Crystal formations that provide illumination frequencies suitable for multiple species, water systems that carry mineral compositions beneficial for various forms of consciousness development, acoustic properties that support communication across species barriers while preserving meditation silence when needed. But the most significant development proves to be emergence of chambers that exist simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the galaxy. Spaces that provide identical environments on different worlds through consciousness technology that transcends normal spatial limitations. Meeting places that allow direct contact between explorers who cannot travel physically but can participate through expanded awareness. These multidimensional chambers create opportunities for real-time combined with extraterrestrial technological capabilities. You participate in design and construction of these multidimensional spaces, contributing insights about consciousness development requirements, while learning from alien architects whose understanding of space-time manipulation far exceeds terrestrial capabilities. Collaborative work that produces results impossible for any single species to achieve independently. The construction process reveals principles of consciousness architecture that apply throughout the universe, natural laws that govern how awareness shapes physical reality, cosmic patterns that consciousness development follows, regardless of planetary conditions or species characteristics, universal wisdom that emerges from collaboration rather than isolated research. But construction also reveals the unique contribution that terrestrial underground traditions make to cosmic architecture. Appreciation for organic development, understanding of how spaces can grow and adapt while maintaining essential character, wisdom about balance between individual and collective needs in spatial design. Terrestrial insights that improve cosmic construction projects throughout the galaxy. The multidimensional chambers become centers for cosmic exploration training, research facilities for studying universal consciousness development, meeting places for coordination of galactic projects that serve cosmic evolution purposes, infrastructure that supports unprecedented levels of cooperation, while maintaining respect for individual autonomy and species diversity. Training programs develop that serve students from throughout the galaxy, curricula that combine universal principles with species-specific applications, teaching methods that honor both individual development and collective wisdom. Educational innovation that emerges from necessity rather than theory, practical solutions to unprecedented challenges. You become primary instructor for terrestrial consciousness development techniques, teaching methods that work across species barriers while preserving essential wisdom that requires direct experience rather than theoretical understanding. Teaching that demonstrates rather than explains, guides rather than directs, inspires rather than compels. The teaching reveals universal hunger for consciousness development that transcends species barriers, planetary conditions, technological capabilities. Curiosity about expanded awareness that appears wherever intelligence evolves sufficiently to recognize possibilities beyond current limitations. Drive toward cosmic consciousness that serves as universal barriers to cooperation. Students arrive from worlds whose surface conditions range from frozen methane to molten metal, whose evolutionary histories include silicon-based as well as carbon-based life forms, whose consciousness development follows pathways that terrestrial psychology cannot imagine. Yet all share curiosity about expanded awareness, commitment to cosmic consciousness development, willingness to learn from traditions different from their own. The diversity creates challenges for teaching that requires constant adaptation to different learning styles, communication methods, consciousness structures. But diversity also creates opportunities for learning that goes far beyond anything possible in single-species educational environments. Teaching that becomes mutual exploration, instruction that develops into collaborative research, education that transforms into cosmic consciousness development, for teachers as well as students. Years pass in this teaching work, decades of facilitating consciousness development for students whose capabilities and limitations span ranges that terrestrial education never imagined. Understanding develops that teaching cosmic consciousness requires ongoing learning, that effective instruction demands continuous exploration, that wisdom emerges from teaching as much as from studying. The teaching work leads to development of new consciousness technologies, practical tools for awareness expansion that work across species barriers while maintaining safety for diverse forms of consciousness. Innovation that emerges from educational necessity rather than theoretical research, practical solutions that serve immediate needs while contributing to long-term cosmic development. But the most important technological development proves to be consciousness translation systems that allow direct communication between radically different forms of awareness. Not language translation, but awareness translation. Systems that convert thoughts and experiences between consciousness structures so different that normal communication becomes impossible. These translation systems open possibilities for cooperation that previously existed only in theoretical speculation. Collaborative exploration between species whose consciousness operates according to completely different principles. Joint research that combines insights from awareness forms that evolved under totally different conditions. Cosmic projects that benefit from perspectives so diverse that no single species could imagine them independently. The translation work requires development of meta-consciousness, awareness that can observe and understand its own operation while maintaining effective function. Self-reflective consciousness that can analyze its own communication. Developing meta-consciousness proves to be one of the most challenging aspects of cosmic exploration training, not because the capability is rare or difficult to achieve, but because it requires releasing attachment to familiar forms of consciousness operation, willingness to experience awareness in ways that challenge basic assumptions about the nature of mind itself. You master metaconsciousness through years of practice with extraterrestrial consciousness forms, gradual development of ability to observe your own awareness while participating in alien forms of consciousness, slowly acquired skill at maintaining human identity while experiencing non-human awareness structures, training that happens through necessity rather than choice, capability that emerges from cosmic exploration requirements rather than terrestrial consciousness development goals. But metaconsciousness proves valuable for terrestrial applications as well as cosmic exploration. Enhanced ability to communicate between surface and underground communities, improved capacity for facilitating integration between different terrestrial consciousness traditions, better skills for teaching consciousness development to students with diverse backgrounds and capabilities. The metaconsciousness capabilities spread through the cosmic exploration community, becoming standard equipment for anyone involved in interspecies cooperation or multidimensional project work, skill that proves as essential for cosmic exploration as basic navigation abilities for terrestrial underground work, universal requirement that serves universal purposes while enhancing individual capabilities. Decades pass in development and application of metaconsciousness capabilities, accumulated experience that reveals principles of awareness that operate throughout the universe, patterns of consciousness development that transcend species barriers and planetary conditions, universal wisdom that emerges from practical application rather than theoretical research. The wisdom proves applicable to consciousness development at all scales, from individual awareness expansion to cosmic consciousness evolution, principles that serve personal development while contributing to universal purposes, understanding that enhances individual capabilities while serving collective goals, wisdom that bridges individual and cosmic consciousness without sacrificing either perspective. But the most important application proves to be understanding how individual consciousness development participates in cosmic evolution, how personal exploration contributes to universal awareness expansion, how terrestrial underground networks serve galactic consciousness development purposes, integration that reveals exploration as cosmic service while preserving its value for individual transformation. This understanding transforms motivation universal service, not abandoning personal benefits of exploration, but placing them in cosmic context that reveals their larger significance, their contribution to purposes that transcend individual needs and interests, while serving those needs and interests more completely than purely personal motivation could achieve. The transformation happens gradually, through accumulated experience rather than sudden revelation, understanding that develops through practice rather than theory, wisdom that emerges from service rather than study. Natural evolution of consciousness that follows cosmic patterns while maintaining terrestrial characteristics and human identity. You find yourself serving as example of this transformation for other explorers, demonstration that cosmic consciousness development enhances rather than eliminates individual identity, that service to universal purposes fulfills rather than sacrifices personal needs and interests. Living proof that cosmic and individual consciousness can develop together in ways that serve both purposes completely. The example spreads through both terrestrial and cosmic exploration communities, influencing approaches to consciousness development throughout the galaxy. Teaching through demonstration rather than instruction, guidance through example rather than direction, influence through inspiration rather than authority. Universal pattern that proves effective across all species and consciousness development traditions. But individual example also reveals limitations of any single approach to cosmic consciousness development, necessity for diversity in methods and perspectives, value of multiple pathways toward universal awareness, recognition that cosmic consciousness requires collaboration between different approaches rather than adoption of single universal method. The recognition leads to development of cosmic consciousness networks that honor diversity while facilitating cooperation, that preserve individual autonomy while enabling collective action, that maintain species characteristics while serving universal purposes. Networks that operate according to principles discovered through terrestrial underground exploration but applied at cosmic scales. These cosmic networks prove to be natural evolution of terrestrial underground communities, extension of exploration principles that originated in caves and catacombs to territories that span multiple galaxies, continuity that preserves essential wisdom while adapting to unprecedented scales and challenges, evolution that maintains core values while expanding capabilities and purposes. The Paris Catacombs serve as prototype and training ground for cosmic consciousness networks, ancient spaces that demonstrate principles applicable to universal principle. But the catacombs also maintain their function as spaces for individual consciousness development, places where personal transformation can happen according to patterns that serve both individual and cosmic purposes. Preservation of original function while enabling cosmic applications, continuity that honors tradition while serving evolution. The balance between individual and cosmic applications requires constant attention and adjustment as cosmic responsibilities increase and galactic opportunities expand. Maintaining spaces for personal exploration while accommodating cosmic training requirements, preserving individual transformation opportunities while serving universal consciousness development purposes. You serve as guardian of this balance, ensuring that cosmic developments enhance rather than replace individual exploration opportunities, that universal service supports rather than sacrifices personal consciousness development. Responsibility that requires wisdom developed through decades of experience with both terrestrial and cosmic exploration. The responsibility proves more challenging as cosmic integration accelerates and galactic projects require increased terrestrial participation. Pressure to convert underground spaces entirely to cosmic applications, temptation to abandon individual consciousness development in favor of universal service, risk of losing terrestrial wisdom in pursuit of cosmic understanding. But resistance to these pressures proves essential for maintaining the diversity that makes cosmic consciousness development possible. Individual consciousness provides capabilities that collective awareness cannot replace. Personal exploration discovers insights that cosmic perspective cannot achieve. Terrestrial wisdom offers understanding that galactic knowledge cannot duplicate. Preserving diversity becomes central mission for terrestrial exploration communities, maintaining approaches to consciousness development that serve cosmic purposes precisely because they remain rooted in terrestrial conditions and human characteristics. Contribution through particularity rather than universality. Service through diversity rather than conformity. The mission requires diplomatic skill at cosmic levels, ability to represent terrestrial perspectives to galactic audiences, while maintaining terrestrial authenticity and effectiveness. Translation work that preserves essential characteristics while enabling cosmic communication. Bridge building that serves both terrestrial and universal purposes. Years pass in this diplomatic and preservation work, decades of maintaining terrestrial consciousness development traditions while facilitating their cosmic applications. Balance, universality, wisdom about maintaining individual characteristics while participating in collective development. Universal principles discovered through terrestrial application but applicable to cosmic challenges throughout the galaxy. The principles prove valuable for cosmic consciousness networks facing similar challenges with other species and consciousness development traditions. Wisdom that emerges from terrestrial experience but serves universal purposes. Insights that develop through local application but prove relevant to galactic problems. Time flows like cosmic wind through galactic space, carrying consciousness toward destinations that have no limit, through territories that span multiple universes, toward understanding that encompasses all possibilities while preserving the particular insights that make each exploration unique and valuable. The Paris Catacombs continue their eternal patience, maintaining ancient wisdom that proves eternally relevant, preserving terrestrial understanding that serves cosmic purposes, offering individual transformation that contributes to universal consciousness evolution.